Communication is one of the 10 core competencies of the CASPer exam. Communication scenarios are likely to have significant overlap with other skills. However, you should be able to recognize a prompt that focuses on communication and respond appropriately. Your ability to communicate could be probed in a number of different ways, and there are, of course, many different people that you might be expected to communicate with in a CASPer scenario. As such, you should develop a general technique that can be applied for each. Let's look at a typical communication prompt. You are a bartender at a local bar and club. You've been tasked with asking a drunken patron to leave after complaints from other guests. They have a history of being verbally abusive. Now, let's consider some possible questions. You might expect something along the lines of the following. How would you communicate with the patron? What might drive someone to become verbally abusive? Have you found yourself in a situation where you had to deal with someone being verbally abusive? As you will encounter in many CASPer scenarios, we have a question that interacts directly with the prompt and requires us to take action. A question that allows us to reflect further on an issue around communication. In this time, someone communicating aggressively. Finally, a question that allows us to reflect on our own experience of communication. Your technique for the first and third questions here can be structured more than for the second question. Remember, these questions are exemplary only, and you might find the ideas or concepts in the actual CASPer to be different or in a different order. The second question will rely on our ability to reflect and see broader context. Let's look at the first question. How would you communicate with the patron? You should first use the general Blackstone tutors approach to determine the following. Relevant role. In this instance, your role is determined for you, and you should make mention of this when deciding how to respond to the scenario. Capture the core concern. If you could correct only one issue, which would you choose? Here, the issue is verbal aggression. Aggressive communication that is making others feel uncomfortable. Assumptions and additional information. What assumptions does the prompt make? And what additional information might you require to answer it? Here, we might question our own relationship with the man who's being asked to leave, for example. You must then deploy a more specific approach. Our role is determined already, and we know that it requires us to speak to the aggressive client on behalf of others. Begin communication in a polite and empathetic manner that is situation appropriate. Here, that means doing your best to not aggravate the client. In other scenarios, it might involve expressing empathy, giving condolences, welcoming someone new, etc. Clearly communicate the core information. In this instance, that means communicating to the drunk patron that he has upset others and must leave. Allow time for the other party to respond or retort. The reason for this is again situation dependent. Here you need to see whether he argues or whether you can persuade him to leave without any further issues. Ensure that you are understood throughout by using active listening and checking in. In this situation, that means asking the patron if he understands that he needs to leave. In other situations, it might involve checking with a patient to see if they understand their treatment, etc. Provide a summary that can be readily understood by the other party and that is delivered in the appropriate tone for the scenario. Ensure that it is understood. Let's now look at the third question. Have you found yourself in a situation where you had to deal with someone being verbally abusive? You should rephrase this question in your head to something more like, provide an example of your ability to communicate with someone being difficult or abusive, i.e., ensure that you focus on your own ability to communicate rather than on the situation. You should expect to provide an example of your communication ability at some point during the CASPer, and therefore have a structure and various samples ready. You should structure your response to this as follows: a short introduction that sets the scene, information on how the other person was verbally abusive, pinpoint this and how it might have made others feel, etc. If this scenario is instead on communicating with someone who is very sad, simply replace this with information on how they were upset and how this altered their communication. A succinct description of how you communicated with the other party. Focus on the particular communication techniques that you used. Ensure that you show an ability to reflect on these and how they worked in this situation. Conclude with a reflection on the importance of reflection and what you learned from this particular example.